continuing straight into Perek Chaf Daled, the 24th chapter of Psalms. It's a chapter which we should be familiar with as well. This one doesn't start Mizmor LeDavid, but rather starts LeDavid Mizmor. Rabbis explain that when it says Mizmor LeDavid, that God, if I'm getting it correct, I hope I don't say it backwards. Mizmor LeDavid means God's inspiration came, and then David wrote the psalm. When it says LeDavid Mizmor, that means David started the psalm, and then God's inspiration came to him afterwards. I believe that's what the Midrash says in trying to understand. Usually, Mizmor LeDavid is much more common than LeDavid Mizmor. There are only a handful that are LeDavid Mizmor, as opposed to many of the Tehillim, as we have seen, start Mizmor LeDavid. Okay, so Psalm 24, LeDavid Mizmor, LaAdonai Haaretz Umlo, Tevel V'yoshveva. The earth is the Lord's and all that it holds, the world and all of its inhabitants. Right? The word Tevel means the inhabited world, the people who live in it, the people who dwell in it. We might think that it's ours. The earth is the Lord's, belongs to God. I believe Heschel wrote a beautiful book called The Earth is the Lord's, a small little book about life in Eastern Europe, but beautiful, as Heschel always wrote very beautifully, as prose is like poetry on Jewish life in Eastern Europe. Small volume. You could finish it in a day. Kihu al yamim yisada v'al neharot yechoneneha. Because he founded it upon the ocean and set it upon the raging waters and the streams. This is something that's understood as a miracle or something that's fantastic in different places. God stretching out the land, and somehow it doesn't sink into the water. Somehow the land stays above the water. It's not a question of we're not here discussing geology and the Earth's core and how it is that North America doesn't sink into the ocean, but in the ancient period, this was seen as a miracle that the land doesn't just sink into the ocean. I guess we can understand it a little bit more miraculously today with global warming. If you live in the outer banks of North Carolina or places in New Orleans or different islands in the oceans in different places, that it seems that those places are sinking in the water. It's obviously more complex than just sinking into the water, but God here this is the miraculous thing, and this proves that it's God's, because if it wasn't God's, it would just sink into the water. Now, one of the ways of understanding the Psalm, this capital of Tehillim, was said as pilgrims, as Ole Regel or others were coming up towards Jerusalem. They would say this, they're walking up towards Jerusalem, and then, according to many, as they get to Har Habayit, as they get to the Temple Mount, they would have sort of this conversation: Mi ya'aleh v'har Adonai, u'mi yakum bimkom kadsho. And I don't know if it's formative or if it's something that was, it's not clear exactly how, but this is the way the rabbis one way, and we'll see a different way of understanding the psalm afterwards. And they would say as they got there to the Temple Mount, who can ascend the mountain of God? Who may stand in his holy place? Right? Are we allowed to go up to the Temple Mount? They're not asking it for permission, really. It's more of just a formality that's not real. You don't have to get the right answer and prove that you fill into these categories, but it's demonstrating the importance and of coming up. And the answer, and we had a chapter like this a couple chapters back, I think it was 15, that talked about who is worthy in God's eyes. We referenced this chapter back then. So verse 4 starts to give the answer. Who can go up to the mountain of God? Who can stand in his holy place? Nechik hapayim uvar levav. So one who has clean hands and a pure heart, asher lo nasa lashav nafshi v'lo nishbal l'mirma, who has not taken false oath or sworn deceitfully. And we saw this back in the last question, back in the earlier capital, that the way you speak, what you say, is very, very important. So clean hands. What does it mean by clean hands? You can understand it maybe, we know in Divrei Hayam, doesn't say this in the book of Shmuel, but in Divrei Hayam, it talks about David could not build the Beit HaMikdash because his hands were bloody. That doesn't mean he necessarily did anything wrong. He went to war to protect the Jewish people. He didn't make, obviously, terrible mistakes, killing of Uriah and the people with him. But so you could understand clean hands as referring to that, or you could refer somebody who doesn't sin. And the importance here of speaking, we talked about it 7 chapters ago, 8 chapters ago, 9 chapters ago. A lot of talk early on in the teens of the chapters of Tehillim about those who say one thing and mean something else, those who speak ill, those who say I can do and say whatever I want because there are no consequences. So that's another sign of somebody who is worthy in God's eye. Verse 5, Yisavracha me'et Adonai utztaka melehe yisho. So this person who goes up to the Beit HaMikdash, goes up to the Temple Mount and has these qualities, doesn't swear deceitfully, doesn't take false oath, has clean hands, has a pure heart, that person will walk away with a blessing from God, a reward from his deliverer. Interestingly, so this is, like I said to you, even if this was some sort of formulation that happened as the Olei Regel, as the people were going up to the Beit HaMikdash for Pesach or Shavuot or Sukkot or some other time, even if you don't fill in these categories, that doesn't mean you can't go up to the temple. You could still go up. You may not carry away a blessing from God. You may not walk away with the same sort of reward as the person who deserves that reward, but the person who has these qualities and goes up to the Beit HaMikdash will leave with some sort of reward. Continuing in verse 6, Zed dor shab vakshe panecha Yaakov sal. We know, of course, think of the word dor as being a generation. We've talked about dor in the book of Tehillim earlier as meaning something that can also mean to all time. It can also mean like in a congregation or in a circle. So Zed dor shav, such is the circle of those who turn to God. This is this person who is Nekicha Payim Uvar Levav, who has the clean hands and the good heart and doesn't swear, is in the congregation, the circle of the people who turn to God. Who are those people? Mivakshe Panecha Yaakov Sela. They are the ones who seek your presence. Yaakov here, a reference to Bnei Yisrael. There are times it's called Yaakov, times it's called Yisrael. We could say maybe Yaakov is earlier in his life. He's seeking out God, doesn't understand exactly what's happening. Those who say that the verse here should read Makshe Pnei Elohecha Yaakov Sela, that Panecha should really be Pnei Elohecha. Those who, right, like Jacob, or those who are from Jacob, that is to say the children of Israel, who request, who seek your presence, God. So this is a person. The first thing you want to do, you want to be a good person, you want to have a relationship with God. The first thing you have to do is seek out God. Try to have that relationship with God. Okay, so now that is the person who's allowed on the Temple Mount. Now now comes a slightly different part of the Psalm, which is we're not talking seemingly about the single person going up. You can understand it this way, but somebody's now at the gates. The rabbis understood this as perhaps a reference to when David was bringing up attempted to bring up and did bring up the Aron. The ark was not in Jerusalem. David made his capital Jerusalem. David built his palace there. David brought the ark up to Yerushalayim to show that it was his palace. Or those who understand it then, there are others who say that this was recited when Shlomo was building the Beit HaMikdash and bringing the Aron after the completion of the creation into the Beit HaMikdash. So different ways. There are those who say that, like in the beginning of the book of Shmuel, where the Aron was taken out to war unsuccessfully, very unsuccessfully in the early parts of the book of Shmuel, when Bnei Yisrael were routed during the days of Eli, and the ark was taken to the territory of the Plishtim. There are those who say that these last verses were said when the ark would return from war. And what is said? Su'u sha'arim roshechem v'hinasu pitchei olam v'yavo melech hakavod. Gates, so the people holding the ark, whether again David or Shlomo or coming back, lift up your heads, right? Gates, lift up. Raise your doors. Why? So the King of Glory may come in. Mizem el hakavod. So the gates, or the people at the gates, return back. Who's this glorious King who are you referring to? Who is this? What are you talking about? We should lift up the gates for the glorious King. Who's this glorious King? The answer is Adonai Izuz v'Gibor, Adonai Gibor Milchama. It's God, the mighty, the great warrior, the strong, the brave. That's who's here. Open the gates. And they say back, maybe they don't understand exactly what it means. And the people at the gates respond again, Su'u sha'arim roshechem u'su'u pitchei olam v'yavo melech hakavod. Gates, lift up, right again, lift up the gates. Lift them up, so that we can come in, v'yavo, again, melech hakavod, so that the God can come in. And again, the people at the gates who would lift up the gates, they say, Muzeh melech hakavod. Now it's right, and now we have a slightly different answer than the first one. It's basically that it's basically the same thing. right? Here, the first time, I should say, the people at the gates who didn't open said, Mi zeh melech hakavod. This time they say, Mi hu zeh melech hakavod, basically the same thing. And basically the same thing is responded here again. But it's slightly more detailed. Adonai tzvot hu melech hakavod sela. It is he, the king of glory. That is the one who is here. It wasn't unclear. You could say the first time the Lord, the mighty, valiant, the strong, the brave, the courageous. It was a lot of adjective descriptions without saying exactly who it is. And here it's being told to us completely who it is. And who is it that's coming up? The Ark of God is returning. The Ark of God is coming up to Jerusalem with David. The Ark of God is returning, is coming to its home with Shlomo into the Beit HaMikdash. Different ways of understanding this phrase. Again, this sort of has two parts of it. This kapitel. The first part is sort of who is worthy to go up to the house of God, who is worthy to go to the Beit HaMikdash, who is worthy to stand there, and we're told the person who speaks truthfully, the person whose heart is correct, the person whose actions are correct, who has clean hands, they haven't committed sins. And then the second part, the understanding, well, what, in a sense, why is it that that type of person goes up and he or she will receive the reward from God? Because that is the place where God is living. That's the place where the Ark of God is. That's the place where the Melech HaKavod, the only one who is the King of glory. There are many kings. There's King David, and there's King Solomon, and then there's King Charles, and lots of other kings all over the world. But there's only one king who is the glorious king, and that, of course, is God. And that's why the person who follows his ways can go up there. Psalm is recited on Yom Rishon, on Sundays. The psalm is recited at times when we return the Torah back to the Aron, like those who would understand when we would return, when the ark would come back from war. And so it's a psalm that we are familiar with, said many times during the year on many different occasions. And again, another one of these psalms, questions of who is righteous to be with God. And important to point out, as was pointed out many times in the books of the later prophets, as they're called, or the prophets who wrote a lot, we could call them, Yeshai, Yirmiyah, Yechezkel, and those, and many of them in Trei Asar. It doesn't say the guy who put on tefillin this morning, or the guy who learned the most Torah, or the gal who lit the most Shabbos candles. Who are the people who can stand in the presence of God? It's those people whose hands are clean, those people who don't talk deceitfully. It's those people who are honest, forthright, kindness, decency. Those are the ones who have the ability more than anybody else to stand in the presence of God.